This story follows a car businessman's life falling apart, both professionally and romantically, due to his poor decisions. In the opening scene, we're taken 6 years prior, and we see Ben Kalman patiently waiting for his EKG results at the doctor's office. While he's trying his best to stay positive, the doctor informs him that the results are not great. Unsure, he suggests they perform different tests in case there's something serious. Ben's world crashes. He even stops listening to the doctor while assuming the worst. However, the scene cuts, and we see Ben in the present, sleeping peacefully in his bed. Getting up, he hops into the shower to wake himself up, before getting ready and heading out. He walks the busy streets of New York, taking his time to a basketball court to meet his family. Upon getting to the court, he sees a young, attractive woman, so when his daughter calls him dad, he pretends that he doesn't know her. Jokingly, he asks his grandson to call him father, so the girl thinks that he's much younger than he is. All together head to a dinner where they meet Ben's ex-wife for lunch, but he doesn't seem like he wants to stay. However, he spots an attractive brunette that makes him want to take a seat. The waiter gets to their table and asks for their order, but when Ben orders a burger, his ex-wife reminds him of the doctor's appointment 6 years ago. Being a skeptic, Ben orders what he wants, so she stops trying to convince him to get something healthy. His grandson happens to have a game during the weekend, but Ben claims that he can't go, because he's going to his girlfriend's daughter's college interview. Both his ex-wife and daughter get confused, as they don't understand why the girl's father's not taking her, but Ben tries to play it off as unimportant. They drop the conversation because both of them know that he's dating a much younger woman because of her father's connections. Things don't go in Ben's favor as his girlfriend ends up falling sick. Because of that, she asks Ben to take her daughter himself, but he keeps refusing. Even the girl's not so keen on going with him, but his girlfriend is consistent. Little does she know the mistake she's about to make. The girl leaves, so his girlfriend takes the time to remind him of the favor her father's making for Ben. So having no other choice, Ben agrees. He tries to settle a deal after meeting with them, but even the investor is not sure of his decision, given that he's in a bit of a pickle. After the meeting, he calls his girlfriend to try and change her mind for the last time, but she goes into detail about her father's sacrifice for him, so he finally accepts that he's going to Boston. The day comes and we see Ben and the girl Allison walking into the airport. She desperately tries to convince him not to go with her, but as she sees that he's not going to change his mind, she tries blackmailing him. He claims that he doesn't lie to her mother, but Allison lets him know that she had seen him at a bar with a foreigner, cheating on her mother. Accepting his defeat, Ben stops in his tracks and lets her board the flight by herself. Regardless, something inside him tells him to go with Allison for her sake, so he promises to stay out of her sight for the duration. What makes her somewhat like him is the fact that he promises not to treat her like a child, because she's not one. We see them at the campus next, and as Ben is explaining how he knows the dean, a frisbee almost hits Allison. Luckily, Ben jumps in front of her and catches it just in time. A college boy comes up to them calling Ben all sorts of names, so he decides to live up to them and throws the frisbee away. The guy continues with the insults, but Ben's not about to have any of them. He attacks the guy, and they start rolling on the grass until a security officer breaks it off. He lets the student off, but asks Ben to explain what he's doing on campus. Allison defends him, telling the officer that he's taking her to the interview with the dean. Luckily, the officer lets them off, but the incident does catch everyone's attention. One student in particular, the student vice counselor Daniel, comes over to introduce himself. He reveals that he's been sent by the dean to guide them to his office, so they start following him. Shortly, the dean meets them and he takes Allison for an interview while Daniel is left to entertain Ben. Given that Ben's suit is dirty, Daniel offers for him to clean up in his room. After changing Daniel's clothes, Ben looks around his dorm room. Something seems to be bothering him in the way Daniel's organized it, making him assume that he's a nerd. He's familiar with the type of guy Daniel is, the ones that have girlfriends but can't bring themselves to sleep with them. Wanting to make that wish come true for Daniel, Ben advises him to get out and explore the endless possibilities. To prove his point, he leaves the dorm room as he spots two girls down the hall. As Ben is using his charm to get their numbers, Daniel can't help but hide behind the door, scared. After talking to the girls, Ben is left satisfied, so Daniel walks over to ask how he managed to do that. Luckily for them, Ben managed to convince the girls to party with them in the evening. On their way to meet Allison, they pass a bench that seems to be important for Ben. Daniel looks at him confused as he takes a seat and enjoys himself for a while. Ben doesn't explain anything, and after having his moment, he gets up and they continue to her. Surprisingly, Allison has found a guy to take her to that same party in the evening. In the evening, we see Ben and Daniel among many drunk teenagers, experiencing the euphoria of a college party. The girls are nowhere to be seen, and Daniel seems worried, but Ben advises him to look around as many girls present themselves as new opportunities. A blonde girl in particular catches Daniel's eye, so Ben tells him to go for it. Daniel doesn't like the idea, letting him know that the girl's brother is also a student at their college, which is mainly the reason no one goes up to her. Taking the opportunity, Ben decides to tell him a little story about his college experience. Perhaps the reason Ben feels compelled to help Daniel get laid is because he sees himself in Daniel. He'd also been the guy no one invited to parties, someone who worked in his free time so he could pay off his college fees. Same as Daniel, he had a crush on a girl that was, in his words, untouchable. However, working as a bartender, he had run into a lot of people from his college. One particular guy stands out because his story changed Ben's life. That same guy had hooked up with his crush, and out of everything he told Ben, he only remembered how she liked it in the bedroom. So by the following week, Ben had learned how to satisfy his crush. He tells his story with such passion, trying to motivate Daniel to do whatever he wants. After the party, we see Ben getting into an old diner. As he walks in, a short guy working the bar lets him know that they're closing soon. Remembering the old times, Ben acts surprised by his behavior, because he would usually stay at the diner until the morning. His old friend Jimmy turns around, surprised to see him back at the place they used to spend their college days at. They catch up and Jimmy assures him that he had called during Ben's fall, but hadn't heard back. Feeling appreciative, Ben let him know that his assistant had informed him, but many calls were left unanswered due to the situation. Happy to see him back, Jimmy makes him the usual, as they sit down and enjoy their time like the old days. Ben returns to the hotel, and a blonde woman catches his attention. Following her, he spots Allison at the bar chatting with Ted. He overhears him trying to make himself a hero in front of Allison, so he joins them at the bar only to embarrass Ted for trying so hard. Embarrassed, Ted excuses himself to the bathroom, and Allison can't help but giggle at how Ben humbled him. In his defense, Ben assures her that he's not trying to stop her from doing anything she wants, nor does he plan on ratting her out to her mother. Surprisingly, Allison doesn't care what her mother thinks, but she cares about his opinion. Ben lets her know that she won't get anything out of the transaction, meaning that he'll fulfill his wish of hooking up with her, and then she'll be left staring at the ceiling. Ted returns, so Ben lets her decide with the information she has. Unexpectedly, Allison ends up taking his advice, convinced that she would have been staring at the ceiling the whole night if she went with him. Eventually, they start talking about intimacy, so she opens up about her first time. Although it hadn't been bad, she felt like she couldn't satisfy or get satisfied by a man. Ben advises her to talk to her partner about what she likes, and even show him if he doesn't understand. Swiftly, the conversation changes to Ben and her mother's intimate relationship, and the tension rises. When he tells her that her body is not the same as a young girl's, Allison gets the courage to be flirtatious, so much so that they end up sleeping together. In the morning, Ben wakes up and realizes that she's gone. After the fifth ring, she finally answers her phone only to tell him that she's already on her way back. Nervous, he asks to speak with her before meeting with her mother, but she assures him that nothing more will come of that, advising him to relax. He listens to her, so we see her at the agent's office next. Ben ends up pulling the strings, and it's all thanks to his girlfriend. After the meeting, we see the three of them at the diner, and while they're trying to enjoy themselves, Allison's mom seems to be getting on her nerves with her snarky comments. Regardless, the dinner goes smoothly, but little do they know the chaos that's about to erupt. While Jordan is grabbing the wine, Ben and Allison go on to the balcony. He wants to talk about the connection they had, but she assures him that it's only a one-time thing. Not only that, she thanks him for the advice he gave her because it turns out that it works. Ben gets confused, so she explains that she's tried it with a guy, and it works. Instead of listening to her, he assumes that she's only trying to throw him off, but she claims that she's been with another guy. His delusion frustrates her and she tries leaving, which might have been the best choice. But Ben doesn't let her. Instead, he opens up about how he feels about her, trying to convince her that they have a special bond. She doesn't budge, but when Jordan comes back, it takes her only a few words to ruin her and Ben's relationship. Allison leaves, but Jordan is left to stare in shock as Ben tries to come up with an excuse. Having nowhere to go, Ben goes to his daughter's, where he goes on and on about how an 18-year-old's body is more exciting than his girlfriend's. Luckily, Susan's husband interrupts their conversation, not wanting Susie to listen to his nonsense. Ben tells him to stay out of it, but the husband refuses, so Ben insults him on a personal level, calling him a weak man. He tries to get Susan to bed, but she decides to stay with Ben a bit more. She knows he's there for a reason, so she asks him to cut to the chase. Even though he knows he's not getting the dealership, he convinces her that he's about to get it and asks for some money to get by. Being his daughter, she feels bad for him, so she hands him a check. In the morning, Ben wakes up to a voicemail from an associate letting him know that the dealership had been passed to another client. By the evening, he tries to make things right, but he's in on some bad news. After 25 years of a successful career, Ben gets fired due to his fall. Although upset, he begs the guy to give him a year to make things right, but unfortunately, it's the end for Ben. His college lets him know that they're letting him go because he's not the same guy anymore. He used to work until 3 a.m. every day, and now he chases girls for a living. Throwing his napkin on the table, Ben lets the waiter know that his colleague will be paying, before storming off. After picking up a close friend of his daughter at the bar, Ben wakes up next to her in the morning. Both of them laugh about the situation, and she expresses her gratitude that he's not her husband. Knowing that their hookup isn't going anywhere, she gets up to get dressed, and Ben asks her for the time. Excitedly, she tells him that she still has time until she has to pick her kids up from school, and a look of can be noticed on Ben. Realizing that he's late, he rushes out of bed and heads to his grandson's birthday party, which he already missed. Arriving at the scene, he gets scolded by his grandson, who's visibly upset that he didn't get to blow the candles with him. Ben makes up a lame excuse about being in a meeting, but suggests they make an even better after-birthday party back at their apartment. Although Susie's husband can't stand Ben, he lets him come to their apartment, only to make their son feel better. Everyone gets in the cab, but before Ben can enter, Susie tells him to find his ride and not dare come without a cake and a present. Ben might be a lousy father and grandfather, but his grandson loves him dearly. After spending the whole day with him, he doesn't want to separate, but Susan reminds him that they need to visit his other grandparents. On his way out, Ben waits until he and Susan are alone to ask for another small loan. She refuses, letting him know that she's not going to give him anything after he misses his grandson's birthday. Before he goes, she warns him not to repeat the same mistake, and even threatens not to let him see his grandson if something of that sort happens again. Having no other choice, Ben goes to his ex-wife in the evening. Although she's more than happy to have him, he feels uncomfortable letting her know that he can't write her any more checks. She takes it lightly, trying to convince him that things will get better. She was in a dark place once and it worked out for her, as she has the apartment with the best view now. Ben agrees, but what bothers him is the fact that she hasn't changed anything in the apartment, even after getting caught cheating. Unlike him, she doesn't change anything if it's perfectly fine. That gets him thinking, and that's why he wakes up in the morning with a thought on his mind. He gets up ready to change his life and try to get himself on the top again. Going to the dealership he planned on getting once, he respectfully introduces himself and asks to work for the owner. Although he's excited to have him on his team, the associate asks to speak with Ben privately. After every scandal Ben had gone through, he let him know that there was nothing he could do to have him work in the same branch again. Ben begs him, trying to work his charm on him, but the guy's already made up his mind. Ben leaves defeated, knowing that it's just the beginning of the end for him. Over the next couple of weeks, he spends his time in a rented apartment that he can't afford. The landlord comes to collect the rent, but Ben begs him to give him some time. As if the risk of getting kicked out hadn't been enough, Susan comes running down the hall, angry that he slept with one of her friends. The landlord feels awkward, so he decides to give Ben until the morning to pay the rent. Susan continues screaming about how bad her friend feels after sleeping with him and hearing back, but Ben doesn't seem to care. He invites her in, and she suggests he gets some type of help for the way he's acting. Ben doesn't believe in medicine, so he refuses. However, Susan threatens that he will never see them if he doesn't change, hoping that it will scare him into therapy. Unexpectedly, Ben lets her know that it's her decision and that there's nothing he can do if she's already made her mind up. Although Ben's left with nothing, he knows that there's one person who won't turn him away. Driving to Boston, he parks in front of a house but is skeptical about knocking. Regardless, he knocks, and Jimmy lets him in without a problem. Not only that, Ben asks if he can work at the diner, and luckily Jimmy agrees. In the morning, we see them working together, but Ben keeps getting distracted by the beautiful ladies around him. He doesn't understand how Jimmy stayed loyal to his wife, so Jimmy decides to explain. The girls from the diner have always been a dream for Jimmy, but with time, he's noticed that they never stay the same. They become old and wrinkly, and given that he has that at home, he doesn't need to sleep around. Jimmy leaves and Ben is left to close the restaurant. However, later in the night, Daniel comes to visit with his new girlfriend. They catch up about everything, and Ben even gets invited to their homecoming party. However, the following morning he runs into Allison, someone who he has to stay away from. She's shocked, so they go outside to clear up some things. Although it's not the best job in the world, Ben lets her know that it's his only option since her mother is making sure he doesn't get any other job. She understands and decides to leave him alone. Boston is a place full of memories for Ben, so in the evening, he goes to visit that same bench he was appreciating the last time he was there. Getting his phone, he decides to call his grandson, but Susan refuses to let him talk to him. Ben tells her about the bench where he first met her mother, but she doesn't seem to care as she hangs up swiftly. Ben returns home, and as he's enjoying his sandwich, the phone rings. It's Jordan, and she promises to get Allison's father involved if he doesn't move out of Boston because she believes that he'll ruin her college experience. Ben seems unfazed, and he even goes to Daniel's party in the evening. He talks to Daniel about Allison, assuming that she's trying to give him some kind of a message, and Daniel backs up his delusion. Getting up, Ben struggles to the bar as he's already drunk. From a distance, he spots a girl that often comes to the diner, and he calls out to her. She recognizes him as he says her order, but what makes her leave is when he indirectly tells her that she eats like a pig. Ben takes a seat at the bar carelessly when Daniel's girlfriend joins him. They talk about Daniel and how great he is, but the girl is interested in the advice he gives him. Being strictly confidential, Ben assures her that he won't tell Daniel what they talk about, or even what happens between them. Confused, the girl asks for an explanation, so he mentions the transaction, assuming that she's not getting it right. A look of disgust appears on the girl's face as she tells him that Daniel thinks that he cares about him. It doesn't seem to faze Ben, so she asks him to leave. Before he gets a chance to, she stops him only to inform him how great of a man Daniel is. However, Ben hits her with the truth that being the nice guy doesn't last. Leaving the party, Ben throws his drink and decides to walk back to the house. Just a few steps off the entrance, a guy gets out of a car from behind Ben and attacks him. Laying on the ground, Ben looks up to him confused, and the guy explains that he's Allison's father's security. He orders Ben to leave as soon as he can if he doesn't want things to go south for him. Ben agrees to leave, so the guy helps him get up, only to beat him up even worse. Ben barely makes it to the house and Jimmy helps, begging him to get it checked out by a doctor. Getting pissed off, Ben asks him to stop pretending that he cares, claiming a person is always alone whether they're at the top or the bottom. He takes his cover of the Forbes magazine as an example, reminding Jimmy that he stood alone for that. However, Jimmy doesn't let him be negative. He knows his ex-wife had been amazing to him, and Ben agrees. He reveals that he'd been great to her until he couldn't be anymore. Going back to the Forbes magazine, Jimmy assures him that he was on it as well, having saved it and all. Ben smiles, realizing that Jimmy's right. They get up to help Ben inside, but he ends up collapsing on the floor. Waking up, he sees Susie by his side and quickly realizes that he's in a hospital bed. Susie caresses his hand, assuring him that everything will be all right, but he can't believe that she's by his side. Soon, she leaves him to rest, and a nurse comes to check up on him. Getting his information, she tells him that they have run some heart tests to check his heart due to his condition. Although he had ordered the tests when intoxicated, he doesn't seem to want to hear about any of it now. Getting the needle in his arm, he gets dressed and decides to leave the hospital immediately. To make things right, he heads to Daniel's to give his shirt back. Before Daniel closes the door on him, Ben apologizes for trying to get with his girl, but it seems like Daniel understands. Ben lets him know that she's one of the good ones, and that he should cherish her. Daniel smiles, agreeing with what he's saying, before thanking him for the shirt. Walking back, he sees his ex-wife sitting on the exact bench where they met many years ago. Sitting next to her, he gets asked about his heart condition, and he tells her the whole truth. The day he found out about his heart was the day he started cheating. Of course, it had been a surprise for everyone, but now they know why he changed. He explains that he needed the change because he had become invisible, and getting old wasn't helping his case. Instead of going to therapy right after the scan, he reveals that he went to a bar and picked up the first young lady who was interested. Curious, she asks what it did for him, and he admits that it helped him a lot. After cheating and not getting caught for years, the idea had transmitted to his career, and again he went on doing illegal work without getting caught. Instead of letting a doctor dictate his life, he lived the life he wanted to. His ex-wife reminds him that he can't cheat demise, but Ben is only now aware of that. Understanding him completely, his ex-wife allows him to make his choice. Pointing to the parked car opposite them, she lets him know that he can come with her to New York or stay in Boston. Ben sits silently as she gets into the car and patiently waits for his decision. A young lady passes by him and he doesn't miss a chance to check her out. After thinking for a while, Ben finally gets up, ready to make the most important decision of his life.